I'm Jennifer Bell, and this is a little bit of Finn, my unofficial therapy dog. You will see more of him later. This is the second in a series of videos about brain spotting. In the first one, I gave a basic background of brain spotting, and today I will describe 3 different brain spotting frames. The first one is Outside Window, which was the very first brain spotting frame that existed. David Grand was an EMDR therapist, as I mentioned in the first video. He was working with an ice skater who was unable to do triple loops and didn't know why. They had done a lot of good work with EMDR, but she still was not able to overcome that particular issue. They were working on doing EMDR. He was moving his fingers back and forth, and she was following the fingers with her eyes. And then all of a sudden, in one spot, he noticed her eyes wobbling. So he paused his fingers there and had her keep looking at them. And to his surprise, a whole bunch of new material that hadn't come up in all of their EMDR work came out, and she processed through all of these things, and they finished the session, and she moved on. The next day, she called him up and told him that she had done multiple triple loops with no problem, and apparently she never had difficulty doing them again. Of course, he was amazed at what seems to have happened there, so he decided to do further experimentation. He obviously developed additional frames after that first discovery of Outside Window, 2 of which are Inside Window and Gazespotting, which I will introduce you to soon. First of all, I don't think I mentioned last time, but you can do brain spotting in person or you can do it online. When you're doing it online, you use the pointer first to determine the limits of the client's screen. That way you know when they can see the pointer and when they can't. As I mentioned in the first video, you start by finding out what issue they want to work on and have them check in and see where in their body they notice activation related to the issue, and then they rate the intensity of activation on a 0 to 10 scale. When we do the different frames, we are finding brain spots, which are orientations of clients' eyes that correspond to activation of different issues. This first one, Outside Window, just consists of the therapist very slowly moving the pointer in the client's field of vision. While the therapist is moving the pointer, they observe the client and notice any involuntary movements the client might be making while watching the pointer. Those involuntary movements very often mark brain spots. So maybe the client blinks multiple times or blinks really hard. Maybe they yawn. Maybe they kind of twitch. Maybe they swallow hard. In one of the trainings I did, I was working with a partner and she just started yawning uncontrollably. That is also something that can happen. So the therapist makes note of places where these involuntary movements happen, and then have the client fix their gaze on whatever spot they're working with and process through the issue. Now, Finn is going to be my brain spotting client through these videos. His issue that he wants to work on first might be something that happened in his past before we got him. He is a rescue. We got him from a rescue organization in Pennsylvania. They got him from a rescue in Kentucky. We have no idea where he was before that. But chances are, getting separated from whatever family he had before was traumatic, and so maybe he would want to work on that. Unless I trained Finn to follow a pointer, I would need to give him incentive to follow something with his eyes. So, for those purposes, I have some yummy snack sticks, and he will come now that there are snack sticks. So, perhaps I would have him follow the snack stick with his eyes. He's also looking at me like, Mom, why are you doing that? So, I will now give him the snack stick that he can enjoy while I'm doing the rest of the video. So, we would decide, okay, we're going to work on the trauma of having lost his initial family. Somehow he would indicate to me where that was showing up in his body. Maybe his legs were tensing up like he wanted to run. I don't know. Maybe I'd have him, tap his paw however many times for, the intensity of the activation, 0 to 10. Who knows? It's fun to imagine. But that would be the outside window frame. The second one, inside window, actually enlists the help of the client in finding the brain spot. In this case, I would use the pointer, and we would start by figuring out whether they noticed more activation on one side, in the middle, or on the other side. Often we have to go through those more than once for the client to get a sense of, okay, I noticed more activation in that sector. Let's say that they said in the middle. Then we would start from one shoulder, go from one shoulder to the other, very slowly. And the client would tell me where in there they notice the most activation. Again, might take more than once going through before they figure it out, but they determine where they think the most activation is on that x-axis, and then we do the y-axis. So we would start from the middle and then go up, and then go from the middle down, and the client would determine where the brain spot was on the y-axis. When you're working with a client in person, you can obviously do a very wide area and very high and low, more so than you can do online. So when you're working with a client online, generally you would ask, does it go up beyond the screen or below the screen or to one side or the other? So the client is not actually limited to the size of the screen. If their brain spot is somewhere off of there, then they can, as they say, bookmark that spot themselves rather than the client holding the spot for them. But if, say, the spot was right here, I would just hold the pointer while the client watched the pointer and just let their brain process. Incidentally, David Grand had started, because as an EMDR therapist, he was using his fingers. After a while, he noticed that, okay, if I'm going to be holding a brain spot for the client for, 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever, I'm going to get mighty tired. So he started using a collapsible, extendable, whatever you want to call it, pointer, so that he could rest his hand or whatever, and the client could still look at the spot. So that is inside window, and again, the processing works the same way. Once you found the spot, the client just looks at the spot and let whatever happens happen. As I mentioned in the first video, they don't have to stare at the spot unblinking or without moving their eyes. They can look away, they can, go back and forth. They can close their eyes, whatever. But the general idea is to watch that spot and let the processing happen. The final frame that I'm going to talk about today is gaze spotting. And that is a kind of brain spotting that just happens spontaneously. So let's say Finn was my client and he was somehow communicating to me, talking about whatever. In this case, maybe he's talking about having, been given up by his initial family. And I might notice that he was maybe looking down and to one side while he was telling me about that. In which case, I would guess that probably was what we call a gaze spot, that particular kind of brain spot. I would ask him to keep looking at that spot and then let his brain process however it goes. So those are our first 3 frames: outside window, inside window, and gaze spotting. In the next video, I will talk about resource spots. If you watched my EMDR videos, or if you have done EMDR, you know that before actually doing EMDR processing, we develop and install EMDR resources. We don't do it that way in brain spotting, but there are times when we find what is called a resource spot, which works similarly to an EMDR resource in that it helps the client to cope with whatever is coming up and maybe turn down the volume, essentially, of what's going on if needed. So, Finn and I will see you then.